Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Sarah Lee. I am a Clean Energy Engagement Specialist here at the University of Michigan Graham Sustainability Institute.
And I'm Lydia Schaafsma. I work for the Michigan Municipal League and help out with our Michigan Green Communities program, as well as Catalyst Communities, which we will talk about a little bit more.
So here's your agenda for today. I do want to note that we are recording, and the recording and slides will be shared with all registrants after today. Attendees can also ask questions at any time using the Q&A feature of Zoom. We do have lots of time reserved for answering your questions, so don't be shy. We'll break at before the hour in case people have to run out. We want to make sure we get to your questions, and then there'll be additional time for questions at the end. As background, today's webinar is actually follow-up to EGLE's Catalyst Communities pre-conference at the Michigan Sustainability Conference, or MISCON, back in October. It was a session on direct pay geared towards local staff or local government staff working in sustainability. But the organizers realized that some of the essential local government finance staff that are needed in direct pay were not going to be in the room. So we wanted to make sure that we planned this webinar to bring and share information about this exciting opportunity to a broader audience, bringing together both those clean energy, fleet electrification, sustainability people, and project planners, in addition to the finance departments, to make sure that everyone is well informed. And so to help explain why Lydia and I are your hosts today, I wanted to briefly explain the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and their Catalyst Communities initiative. So this is a state initiative that provides education, training, planning, and technical resources to local governments as they plan for climate impacts through a range of options to meet communities where they are, regardless of geography, population, or pre-existing knowledge. If you go to their website, michigan.gov/catalystcommunities, you'll find a curated list of accessible online resources, local community examples, and recorded webinars, all organized into 9 convenient categories, which you can see on the screen. And then through a partnership with EGLE, Lydia and I help support the Catalyst Communities initiative, and we lead additional peer learning cohorts and technical assistance opportunities.
Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar, I want to spend a few minutes introducing you to Michigan Green Communities, or MGC as we call it. MGC is essentially a sister program to Catalyst Communities. It is administered by the Michigan Municipal League on behalf of our steering committee of partners, which includes our funders, EGLE and MEDC. MGC is designed to accelerate environmentally sustainable actions by communities to enhance Michigan's livability and economic competitiveness in the 21st century global green economy. Next slide. The core of the MGC program is our annual benchmarking program, which is the Michigan Green Communities Challenge. It consists of 133 different action items, which are all organized into the same 9 categories as Catalyst Communities. These actions are all within the control of local governments in Michigan and help them to embed sustainability in their operations to create more resilient communities. And the challenge is open to all community types, whether you're a county, a city, a village, or a township. Last year, we had a record 63 communities from around the state participate. And if you're interested in participating for next year, the reporting period for the 2024 calendar year will open on January 1st. So be sure to visit our website at migreencommunities.com to register your community for an account if you haven't done so already. And I did also want to mention our opportunities for networking and free technical assistance, which are tied to participation in the annual MGC Challenge. First, we have the Accelerator cohort, which is for bronze and silver communities. It is a module-based program that takes a deep dive into a single topic in a group setting on Zoom with subject matter experts. Our last module explored local energy efficiency and renewables, and the current one is focusing on implementing sustainable purchasing policies, just to give you a little highlight. And then for silver, gold, and platinum communities, we have the Catalyst Leadership Circle program and fellowship. In addition to regular networking and learning opportunities, the CLC enables local governments to collaborate with a graduate student on an advanced sustainability project, producing shareable deliverables usable by all communities in Michigan, like the IIJA and IRA funding tracker. And you can go to the website here on the page to see all the projects and their deliverables. All participating communities in MGC also get free registration to the annual Michigan Sustainability Conference, MISCON, and the My Healthy Climate Conference. Thank you to our current MGC participants, and we hope that your community will consider joining us if you have not already. So now that everyone understands the history of why you're here and why we're here, let's discuss direct pay. So to start off, we have a couple of poll questions to ask. The first just asks what your role is, whether you're local government finance staff, an elected official, or other staff. And the second question will ask you about your familiarity with direct pay. So these questions will kind of help us get a better idea of who's in the audience today. And we'll just give everyone a few moments to answer the questions and briefly discuss the results.
Answers coming in. Give it a couple more seconds here. Great. 100% answered. Perfect. All right. Can you see those results, Lydia?
I can, yeah. So it looks like we're pretty split between general local government staff, 28%, and local government finance staff. Then we also have some representatives from nonprofits, consultants. Yeah. And then we have the next question on here too. Oh, I think I just have to scroll down. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, so the majority of the audience is new to direct pay. So happy to have you here. And then 34% have some introduction, but are still fairly new. And then 11% are a little bit further into the process. So today's webinar will offer content that will be relevant to you no matter your role in a local government or familiarity with direct pay. Thank you everyone for answering. We are going to move on to our first presentation. So to start us off, we have Emily Brock, who is the director of the National Government Finance Officers Association's Federal Liaison Center, joining us. Emily's presentation will give us an overview of the direct pay process and some basics of what you need to know to file for reimbursement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily to get started.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to talk with the group. Happy to see a fair amount of finance officers on. That's hopefully you are members of GFWA. Hopefully I'll see you at our annual conference here in DC come June. But otherwise, what I saw, I think, in the participation is actually a really healthy sort of dose of the people who are looking at this. There are elected officials who are interested in it. There's finance officers who are maybe hearing about it from sustainability officers in their organization, or maybe even the finance officers, you know, through budget discussions or other things, have heard about this elective pay thing that's now in our presence. And, you know, when Sarah and Lydia and I were kind of talking about what should this be called, we quickly decided it could be demystifying. Now, I'm not a speller, and so it took me 4 times to actually spell it correctly. But the fact is, there are a vast majority of folks on this line still kind of are new at this. And so figuring it out and what is it is going to be a large part of what I'll be talking about. But then I'll also be talking about placing the internal controls in place so that your entity can be successful in filing. Now, before I go anywhere off with this, What I think is important, and the reason that there's so many folks on the line, I think that, are brand new at this, and admittedly so, is because nothing like this has existed before in our federal structure. We have had tax opportunities as state and local governments to receive reimbursements or refunds. We've also, of course, had opportunities for grant funding, which would be interacting with the federal government in a fiscal way on the front end of a project for outlined deliverables. But the fact is, this is something that's totally different than all of that. And so the part of that means that your entities are going to have to start to think about, well, if it's entirely different than a grant, and it's not the same as, let's say, Build America bonds or bond structures, what is it? And how do we get there? So let me start first by saying, we are not in the same circumstance that we were over the past 4 years. And by that, I mean, we've had a national election, which means the administration is going to change. It's important to note this administration has a number of resources online that help to describe what this project is, talk about eligibility in the code, and certainly give entities a better understanding of how to pursue elective pay. Because of that, we would suggest at GFOA, we would suggest if you find a resource that is particularly useful from this administration, print it out, make sure that you have a hard copy of it, because web pages can come and go. And so if you do find something that's helpful, something that helped guide your policy decisions at any point in time, just make sure you have that document that was online and actually printed out on your desk so that you can have discussions on the policy environment at the time that you made that fiscal decision to pursue, let's say, elective pay, and sort of go down that path. So we would suggest, of course, making sure that you get as smart as you can about the information that's there. And again, if you find any information particularly useful, just make sure you print it out and you have it for future policy discussions, but also any kind of audit discussions that may occur after making an investment. Okay, so that said, if you're looking at it and you're thinking about it inside of your city or your county, or maybe you're a political subdivision, there are a lot of sort of new processes that we would suggest the GFOA you start to think about. First of all, like I said, it's not a grant. Grants are things that finance officers tend to aggregate in their office, and the controls around the ways that you spend, like the ways that you spend grants, are processes in place that are already established. Because this is something different, because this is something new, what's important is that you kind of figure out what it is. And what it is, an elective pay, is a payment that you receive from the IRS after you place an eligible investment into service. So because of that, what's required is that you have to have people at the table who understand capital decisions, any kind of budget allocations. You also have to have people at the table who understand what it means to tell the IRS that you placed an item into service. And you have to have tax specialists on hand. So what we say is, you just have to, when you're thinking about pursuing elective pay inside of your entity, you need to start thinking about curating your team. You've got to make sure you've got some legal folks in the room, some finance folks in the room, and those sustainability folks who are often movers and shakers, and are heavily involved in investment decisions so that sustainability goals and metrics and policies can be met. All three of those types of entities are in the room when you're deciding to pursue elective pay. Then after you curate your team, what the IRS says is you've got to pre-file your project in a portal after the eligible project is placed into service. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. What is an eligible property, and what does it mean to be placed into service? You note your intention to the IRS through that pre-filing registration process, and the IRS bingo bango issues you a registration number. So the IRS looks at your project, assesses its eligibility, and says, yes, the city of Emily Brock has an eligible project, and therefore her registration number is, let's say, 10. So then the city of Emily Brock takes that registration number, places it on top of an income tax filing that she's going to have to start to do, or a Form 990T. And I make sure that I have all the information, all of the money figures like behind that registration. And then I send it all into the IRS processes it, and then they issue the refund to me. They issue a check to me. Now, interestingly, this looks really simple. Of course, it's not as simple as it looks on this slide. There's a lot of processes that need to go into place. But this is generally the step-by-step process, and each one of them has a deliverable date. So as your entity is thinking about pursuing elective pay, you're going to have to start to look at the calendar. What's due when? How might I be able to make sure that I file accordingly and the information is submitted so that at the end of the day, I finally get to that gray box where the IRS processes my return and returns that check to me. So let's take a step back and let's start at step 1. So I had initially started talking about this process with finance folks, and I called it the three-legged stool until I realized the three-legged stool is just a dated concept. It's a saturated concept. I thought I could find something a little bit more relevant. And in fact, I kind of thought about it and I said, all right, so what does the three-legged stool kind of represent? Well, if you think about the earth, and its relativity to occupations and types of roles that are played in local governments, there's a lot of core elements. First of all, you have to have the core of the earth. And so the core is sort of the method by which all of the things are heated, the life on the planet begins. And so I would actually place your finance team right there at the core. The core understands what the policies are. They understand how to protect the public fisc. They understand how to collect, and they understand how to redistribute. So your finance team has to be on board. The magma, though, the lava, the movers and the shakers, to me, are your sustainability team. Your sustainability team is often kind of looking at investments across your enterprise, thinking about how and where resources need to go so that your policy directives, your sustainability goals that are inside of your entity can be achieved. Now, I'm going to say this once, but your legal team is the crust. I'm not calling legal people crusty, but the legal folks protect what's on the inside. So consider this. The capacity of the legal team and their contribution to your ability to do elective pay means your legal team is going to have to figure out the eligibility of the project. They're going to have to know whether or not that each time you issue an invoice, all the ways that you pay for these investments and the collection of those then fall within the legal scope and framework of the tax code. So, there's a lot of functions here that are kind of adding to the concept so that you have a really good team in place in case there are any questions. And what I can say is that those that I know that have filed successfully have done a really good job of sort of incorporating each one of the attributes of each of these professions so that, if you are a sustainability officer, contacting and staying in touch with your finance team is crucial, is critical. Walk a couple of inches in their shoes and understand they have the policy structure that they work within. And right now, what we're asking them to do is to do something entirely different, to file a 990T, to figure it all out and understand sort of how to put policies in place that allow for those internal controls to make this filing process easier. So make sure you've got those 3 folks on your team. Now, Also, what I would say is don't hesitate to make sure that you are aggregating as many resources as you can. As I mentioned, make sure that you collect the information that this administration has out there. But also there are many other resources that are available, including IRS publications that help for you to kind of take that initial step, understand that you have an eligible project, and then what do you do right after that? I do have a couple of favorites. First of all, I really like IRS Publication 5884, which is linked to these slides, and I really like Publication 5902. Now, the purpose of these IRS publications are for you to be able to go through the process step by step from the IRS perspective. I'm going to say those files are actually linked to this presentation. So 5884 is on the right and 5902 is on the left. But the purpose of these publications, like I said, 5884 is for you to get into the portal to understand what you need to do to register to tell the IRS that you've made an eligible investment. And then 5902 is actually a really good resource for you to set permissions in your portal. So let's say, for example, you are ordering a completely electrified fleet. That's a lot of vehicles in some cases. And so you may want to have your vendor to be able to come in and verify VIN numbers and all of those things. So the 5902, the publication 5902, lets you understand who has permissions to see what information and how might you be able to control that information as you are administrators of that information for your city on behalf of your constituency. So keep those in mind. Those are some really good resources. But then if we dive into 5884, you might say, okay, Emily, I know I bought a Ford Lightning in 2024. What do I do next? And what the IRS publication 5884 says, first of all, you have to register in ID.me. So ID.me, it may be familiar to many of you, certainly harkens back to ARPA, those of you who are ARPA recipients, prime recipients. ID.me is verifying the person who is submitting the information on behalf of the entity, the filer. So if Emily Brock is a finance officer in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Emily Brock will be registering through ID.me and making attestations on behalf of Ann Arbor that I understand the information that I submitted is true to the best of my knowledge. But also when I open up that ID.me account, I have to be ready to submit information about my Ford Lightning. So I've got to make sure that I have my login credentials. I want to make sure that I can effectively go in on behalf of Ann Arbor. And part of that means I've got to figure out my tax ID number, my TIN number, my EIN. I've got to make sure that I understand when I purchased that Ford Lightning, when did I purchase that Ford Lightning, and what type of information should I bring to the portal with me. We want to make sure that you have your VIN number, your title. You want to make sure that you have verifying information that says that you own that facility and that facility is located in a certain area. So you want to make sure that you have that information. Last but not least, you as the filer of this information, you want to make sure you have your banking information because you actually do have to have a routing transit and an account number when you're opening up your portal. So I want to also be clear. You can open up your portal anytime you'd like to. Each year, each filing year, you're going to have to open up your portal and you're going to have to put in all of the investments, eligible investments that your entity has made into your portal so that the IRS at the end of the year, you can kind of close your portal, you can submit your information to the IRS. The IRS can look and say, okay, you bought a Ford Lightning, you installed solar panels, and you set up a charging station in one of your public parking lots. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at all of that information together. And as the city of Emily Brock, I went in and I put in all of the information that allows for verification of location, of ownership, and all of the facilities information that allow for the IRS to verify it's an eligible entity. And then They accept that information. They look at that information. Sometimes they are highly critical of that information, in which case you'll go back and forth with the IRS to verify that information. And then they'll issue you your registration number. So at the bottom of this slide, as you can see, your step 3 will be accomplished once you receive those registration numbers. Now, after you receive those registration numbers, you're going to realize there's probably a lot of internal controls that can be put in place in your entity to help you the next time. Like, first of all, when you purchase things, make sure you're tracking your purchase orders and make sure you understand exactly when those entities, those eligible investments are placed into service. So you're going to want to start to track that information. If you have an enterprise resource planning system, or if you have other financial systems, just make sure you're tracking all of that information together so that next time you go into the portal, next time it opens up, you have that information in place. You're going to also want to track your unique entity identifier. So that may also be relevant to those of you who are federal funds recipients or ARPA recipients. Those UEIs are important to vendors that you're interacting with. So make sure you're just you're collecting that information accordingly, so that when you pre-registration register and then you're ready to file your taxes, you have that information available to you. I want to also pause really quickly. If you have a highly complex project that may require financing, such as using municipal or tax exempt bonds, you are going to have to wrap in a third person into your sustainability team approach, and you're gonna want to make sure that you have bond counsel with you, because they are going to have to issue tax exempt opinions, and you're going to have to make sure that you're making continuing disclosures to your investors of those municipal bonds, so they understand sort of the interactivity of the receipt of elective pay and then their investments in your community, those bonds that are issued to support those projects. As you're collecting all this information, of course, that's really helpful to the pre-registration portal, but you're getting really close at this point to filing your income tax. Now, I keep saying income tax because, really, this is not necessarily the same as your 1040. For those of you who are nonprofit entities, I know there are at least 2 of you on the line right now. For those nonprofit entities, filing a Form 990T might not be that unfamiliar to you. You may have already filed, it's very likely you will have already filed 990Ts up until this point. But for all you cities and political subdivisions, this is entirely new for you. And so making sure as you're approaching the pre-registration portal and watching the questions that they're asking of you, make sure that you are starting to aggregate physical information, including documentation, but also price and cost. Because at the end of the day, when you get to you filing your 990Ts, they're going to start to ask for the dollar figures. So pre-registration portal doesn't necessarily ask how much you spent or how much you think you're getting back, but the Form 990Ts do. So as you're aggregating that information, start to set in those strictly financial internal controls so that that information kind of starts to flow to the finance office. So filing your 990Ts really isn't that big of a deal. You have the information already available to you. Then you get to step 4. As I said, you're ready. You're ready to file your 990T on the 15th day of the 5th month after the end of your accounting year. So that's a technical term from the IRS. That is technically your due date. So if you are a calendar year, fiscal year, then the end of the entity's accounting year will be December 31st. If you are July 1st to June 30th, then the end of your fiscal year and your accounting year is June 30th. So make sure that you're paying attention to whether or not you want to be a calendar year filer or a fiscal year filer. There's pros and cons either way. A finance officer might not like to establish an entirely new fiscal calendar just to accommodate this. But at the same time, you might actually have systems in place that allow for you to accommodate a calendar year filing. in which case you're just going to have to make sure you figure out what is the 15th day of the 5th month at the end of your accounting year. And as you're starting to approach that, of course, you will have already pre-registered. So you have your pre-registration numbers, and then you're going to be filing your Form 990T. Unfortunately, a lot of the information sort of leading up to now, they've kind of said, all you need to do is file your 990T. Well, GFOA has a number of resources available to you that help for you to realize, in addition to the 990T, you have to have supporting documentation. You not only have to file your 990T, but the information displayed on your 990T contains information that's aggregated in what's called a Form 3800. And the Form 3800 gets information from each of the individual tax credits forms. So if you have an EV charging station, you're going to file a Form 8911. If you have electric vehicles, you're going to file Forms 8936. And if you have solar panels, for example, you're going to file a Form 3468. If you have all three types of investments in your community, then you're going to file all three types of forms. You're going to aggregate that information in a Form 3800, and then all of that information then gets filed in a Form 990T. So as you can see, it's not super simple. We'll go over that one more time. The IRS says all you got to do is file your Form 990T, but 990T contains information from Form 3800, which aggregates information from Form 8936, which aggregates information from a Schedule A that's filed on every single electric vehicle. So you might say, Emily, get out of here. I don't want to see all these forms. This is too much for 10 in the morning. Give me a break. But what I'd like to say is there are a few key points here. First of all, there's no need to panic. Because this is your first time filing a 990T, this looks like a ton of information. But what GFOA has done is we've actually, we've taken these forms and we've done an annotated tax form, and that is a link at the end of this presentation. So we actually have like boxes of information where you put the dollar figures. It's a lot. It looks like a lot. It's very confusing when it's shown to you like this. But if you're keeping your notes and your emails from pre-filing and you've got your purchase orders in place and you're working effectively with your team, just make sure that you are asking for specifically the information that's required in each one of these tax forms. And those internal controls can be easy enough to set up. Now, what we would suggest, a little additional suggestion on behalf of GFOA, is make sure too that you're reinforcing that collection of information for audit controls in the future. The IRS requires for you to keep information 6 years past the end of your accounting year. Keep that information, keep tabs on that information, and aggregate that information in a space that's easily accessible in case there is audit effects that happen post placing the eligible a project into service. And then also, as you're thinking about, as you're preparing for the 15th day of the 5th month at the end of your fiscal year, make sure you've got little controls or checks in place on each one of your teammates so that you know the information not only that you're putting in your pre-registration portal, but the information that you're aggregating for your 990T is not only kept in one place, but it's defensible. You know exactly where that information came from, and you can find it again anytime you need to. So those things are especially important as you're approaching your tax filing. And this is a little bit more simple of a picture. This is non-IRS talk. Remember that 990T is the thing that's important, that you must file your income tax statement in order to claim the elective pay. It grabs information from your 3800, which aggregates information from each one of those forms. Now, if you only invested in an electric charging station, then the only form that you're going to file is that 8911, which feeds into the 3800, which feeds into the 990T. If you had a ton of electric vehicles that you purchased for your fleet, you're going to have to file a 8936 Schedule A for every single vehicle that you filed or that you purchased. You aggregate that on an 8936, it goes up to the 3800, and then it flows up to the 990T. So this is a little bit more simplistic version of what the IRS is asking you for, but it's a good roadmap to say, okay, well, this is the types of information that I need. So therefore, I'm going to put those internal controls in place so that I can not only pursue the collection of that information, but then I can effectively file by the due date. And then last but not least, you receive the elective pay. So far, we are unaware of distribution of elective payment to any entity that filed their 990T. In defense of the IRS, technically the due date was on Friday of last week. So if they turned around 990Ts that fast, I would fall out of my chair right now. The IRS is not known for significant efficiency. So we need to make sure we have a little bit of patience in understanding how they process and the way that the distribution occurs. But that said, it's curious that they are asking for your routing transit number and your banking information when you pre-register. The Paperwork Reduction Act requires the IRS to distribute proceeds accordingly if they have ACH information. We're still not sure whether PRA applies to this. That's a fancy way of saying we're not sure whether or not you're going to get a direct deposit or if you're going to get a physical check. And that said, there does need to be internal controls for the tracking of that money when it comes back, because as I said, this is not a grant. The money didn't come to you in advance of the project. The money comes to you after the project is placed into service. And so therefore, your entity might have to think about a budget amendment that would change the allocation for previously designated capital proceeds, especially if there are municipal bonds attached to it. Otherwise, you're going to have to make sure your controller, your treasurer, whoever is handling the ACHs and or the checks that are coming in to keep an eye out for that specific amount from the IRS, because it certainly is not going to come with a lot of extra information about where it came from and what it does. So consider, first of all, figuring out how to find the direct deposit or the check as it is issued. And then, importantly, consider the future use of the proceeds. This is something that has been a very popular topic. Sarah and Lydia told me that you've already talked about this at other Michigan League events. How are you going to use the money that is coming in? So first off, you're going to have to consider how to budget for that payment, but also what we're starting to see across the country is discussions about how to take those proceeds, hold them in a fund. Maybe it's a special use fund, maybe it's a restricted fund with specific policy designations on how the money can be spent. In particular, because again, many entities that filed for their 2023 projects made these investment decisions without understanding there was going to be a 30% rebate from the IRS. So for many entities that filed for 2023 projects, they kind of have found themselves with this 30% return on their investment. And they're saying, what should we do with this? Should we use this to incentivize similar types of investments across the entity moving forward? I know that there are a few entities, of course, in Michigan that have asked that question, but many, many entities across the country are starting to think creatively about how to use those proceeds. And last but not least, if you do have a project that requires monitoring of labor, domestic content, and other applicable costs, you're going to have to make sure that you continue to monitor those vendors' ability to provide that information, and that the thresholds that are set in place in the federal program are met. And what that means is you're going to have to make sure that you also set up internal controls of measurement for those vendors that are participating in your eligible projects. So this is a lot of information as I understand it. and of course, as I understand it right now, but just know there is plenty of information on how to better understand this program and the applicability to you and your investments on the internet. And so I've attached many of those links, a lot of slides that are available from previous presentations, but also resources from places like the National League of Cities, Lawyers for Good Government, World Resources Institute, and of course, the Government Finance Officers Association. So we will have that information perpetually on our website for your information, but also just poke around to try to figure it out. And if you have any questions, I am happy to be a resource at any time. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sarah and Lydia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily, for that great introduction. And just as a note too, we'll be sharing these slides with everyone after the webinar, so you can go back and reference them and click through all the links. Next, we're going to have Cassie Rowland, who is a direct pay program manager with the Michigan Infrastructure Office. Cassie, along with Chris Brady, the director of MIO's Technical Assistance Center, are leading direct pay efforts at the state level. And in this presentation, Cassie will overview the Technical Assistance Center support services. So Cassie and Chris, go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Chris, I'll hand it to you to intro the MIO TAC, and hopefully our slides will be up in just a second.
Well, hey, everybody. Oh, here we go. Good. I am Chris Brady. I'm the director for the Technical Assistance Center, which is within the Michigan Infrastructure Office, the state of Michigan. And as Lydia said, also with me is Cassie Rowland. She is our program manager for our new support program for direct pay, elective pay. So thanks, Sarah and Lydia, for the opportunity to talk to what looks like over 70 folks from municipal finance offices and municipalities. That's exciting. I know that this opportunity is new and strange to us that haven't filed taxes, and hearing about filing taxes is weird. And so it's cool that so many of you are interested, because the reality is probably there are many of you that have already invested in these types of projects to keep forwarding the move toward clean energy. And this is an opportunity to get some of those dollars back from the most recent investments that you've made, and be able to make plans to do more going forward, because you'll see that these projects, you don't have to pay for all of it out of your pocket. There's grants and there's these rebates that can end up paying for the lion's share of them. So just to quickly introduce what the Technical Assistance Center is, if some of you haven't become familiar with that, our job is to help our Michigan communities draw all of the federal infrastructure funds to Michigan as possible, to take advantage of what's come through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So we work one-on-one with communities, whether it's the grant writing team, and now it's potentially going to be the finance office, if you're going to work with filing direct pay. But we provide technical assistance and planning and matching grants to local governments or planning organizations, and also federally recognized tribes to access the federal funds. So we have a website, which I believe there's a URL or a QR code, at the end, which you can pull up our website and read all about it. But today we're going to talk about direct pay support. But the website will explain that we do grant identification, grant writing, and match funding for these federal grants. But with the addition of elective pay, we are really excited, because I just want to explain that, again, you may have already invested. The state of Michigan had actually invested. We have been investing in clean energy technologies. And in 2023, we put 6 clean energy eligible or direct pay eligible clean energy initiatives into service. 5 solar projects and 1 electric vehicle was purchased in 2023. So we rushed around here at the state. Those were done through the DNR. We filed the total project cost for those 5 solar projects at the DNR, different DNR sites, and the 1 EV were $1.7 million in total project costs. And our direct pay refund, this is hot off the presses, we learned this on Friday, is $614,180 for an average of 38% or 36% of those costs being returned to us in a direct pay payment. So that is amazing because yes, we're thinking about how can the DNR and the other agency that purchased the electric vehicle use those funds and continue the cycle of investing in clean energy projects, especially knowing that we get the dollars recycling back. So we're excited about that because you can do it too. Again, the time, I believe, that you understood from Emily for what was put into service in 2023, the time has passed. But what have you done in 2024 that is eligible that you can then claim these direct pay credits for? That's where everybody should be thinking right now, and it's exciting to see that you are. So I'm going to turn it over to Cassie because through the Technical Assistance Center, we have developed a support program, and it's still under construction, but she'll explain that to be able to help you get here. Because again, filing taxes is new. Having a state-centric sort of localized support opportunity through Cassie and the TAC is probably going to be really helpful because you can reach out to us and find out state-specific information. So we decided this is a great way to get these federal dollars into Michigan and keep moving our Michigan priority of clean energy technology forward. So Cassie. Thank you.
Chris. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the support that we are working on providing to communities like yourselves. First, we are embarking on an education effort. So we are launching a new website that is hopefully going to be up either today or tomorrow, where we will have lots of resource materials. We will have announcements that share the latest updates on guidance from the IRS on elective pay. We've put together some frequently asked questions. We will announce when there are IRS office hours. My understanding is that those have been very helpful to folks filing, and they've had them typically twice a month. We're also hoping to have our own office hours to be able to field some of the individual questions that we've received from folks, and so that different communities can learn from each other as well on those office hours. And we're hoping to pull in some third-party partners like Emily and others, hopefully, to join those office hours and see if we can get some questions answered. We also really want to be sharing some success stories from folks in Michigan who have already filed, who have earned their checks when those come in the mail, so that a lot of the questions that are being asked will be answered just from learning from others. And I know Sarah and Lydia, we talked about this back at MISCON, potentially figuring out ways to have some peer learning opportunities. So we're exploring whether we could put together some different cohorts of communities that have already filed and pairing them potentially with communities who have not yet filed, and exploring that as a work stream. So those are our education efforts, more to come, and please stay tuned for the link to our new website that, like I said, will be launching very soon. We also want to work on an outreach program. So we have been talking about a train the trainer program, and finding a way to have really direct pay champions across the state of Michigan at trusted organizations, not only to answer questions about direct pay and kind of expand our reach from the tax standpoint, but also to really try to help folks embed direct pay into projects that they hear happening around the state. And then again, with the success stories, we want to create a story bank and really celebrate those who have successfully filed for elective pay and who have received their checks. And so we want to showcase those from our perch here in the state. So at any point, if you've filed or if you have filed and gotten your check, please reach out to us. We'd love to showcase the kind of win for your community and for the state. And then the technical assistance piece that I think Chris was referring to earlier. the first kind of focus for us is getting some communities accounting services, because we know that a lot of these filing processes and specific forms and questions like that kind of come down to needing an accountant to help you with documentation and with other kinds of questions. So one of the things that the Michigan Infrastructure Office did was over purchasing accounting services. So we've used these services to help the state with its filing and completing the forms and pre-registering through the IRS and all of that. We've over purchased those services so that we have some extra, and we want to help communities that have projects placed in service in 2024 get those filings in as soon as possible. So we are going to be creating an application process and selection criteria, and then we'll open that application up and we'll be shouting it from the rooftops so that we hope you all apply. And on the new website that again is coming out today or tomorrow, there will be a way to sign up for elective pay news and announcements. But for now, you can either go to find us on Facebook or sign up at the Michigan Infrastructure Office newsletter on our website. And I put the link to our website in the chat. I will stop there. Oh, wait, actually, no, I'm not going to stop there yet, Sarah, because I just remembered something you asked me to mention. One of the things that has been talked about quite a bit is the fact that this is not necessarily upfront capital. This is funding that comes after the fact. But what we have been learning about and talking with Michigan Saves, the Green Bank, is the bridge loan program that they offer. So if you're kind of thinking, wow, this is a lot of money up front and it might take a while for me to see that check come in, Michigan Saves has a bridge loan program where they provide a loan for the direct pay amount up front, and then you pay it back upon receipt of the check. And so that is something we'd recommend you go check out. It's another really important component of this process. Now I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie and Chris. Let's pause here for Q&A. I know we've had some in the chat that folks have been responding to. Thank you for that. If anyone else has questions that they want to ask now, feel free to type those in. They could be for any of the speakers so far. So Emily, Cassie, or Chris.
I see there's a question. Is there a fee for this service, and will there be another window of eligibility? If that's referring to the Technical Assistance Center, there is no fee. We are funded through grants, coming from different sources, actually. So no fee for technical assistance support. There will be no fee for accounting support either once that is up and running.
We have another question, general question, but trying to plan for long term. If an IRA grant has been awarded, is there a risk that funds can be rescinded by the new administration, or are the funds safe?
Well, I think what we are strongly encouraging is that you work very hard to get all of your contracts signed. And once you have signed contracts, they're much safer than unsigned contracts. And occasionally there's a lot of back and forth. If I'm not quite sure, it's probably the EPA that you're working with. They are hustling also to get all of the contracts that they have awarded out and signed and processed and on record. So if you don't have like a key point person that you're working with at the EPA to move your grant to contract stage, just start getting knocking on their door, getting a hold of them, and getting a connection, because they are just as motivated to get things buttoned up as you are. So
I did want to touch on, so the question asked about IRA fund. Can you repeat the question?
Sure, this one went to the chat instead of Q&A. It
Okay.
says, if an IRA grant has been awarded, is there a risk that funds could be rescinded by the new administration, or are they safe?
So, the IRA is not a grant. And so that's an incredibly important part of the discussion. If an IRA registration number has been issued, then after the registration number has been issued, you have to file your 990T. Technically, the way that the congressional budgeting or appropriation cycle works is that you are already included in the appropriation as a mandatory spend if you have been issued a registration number. So what's important is that you get your project and you get your project registered and you have that registration number in hand in order for you to have continuous IRA funding. There was a great question in the Q&A that I kind of went a little nerdy on. So if you have access to the answered questions, you know, there's a question about, will direct pay still be available after the new administration takes control? Would it require legislation to rescind it, correct? And I want to thank anonymous attendee for typing in that question because technically, the Inflation Reduction Act is not a grant. So therefore, obligated, unobligated doesn't matter. That's not a concept here. Instead, what matters is that it has federal statutory support moving forward. So technically the law passed in 2022. What has to happen is there has to be an act of Congress that rescinds the underlying statute in order to start dismantling the program. So it's going to take a long time. And for us, in our purposes, for government finance, for governments across the country that are eligible entities, you're going to have a lot of headway. You're going to know that they're working on this because there's going to be significant effort by this Congress to try to unwind that statute, which requires separate legislation than tax legislation. So I think it's important too to note there are many rural beneficiaries of this program. Electric co-ops are beneficiaries of this program. There is vested interest in corporations in this statute. So there's going to be a lot of lobbying to try to keep this statute in place. So that's a really long-winded way of saying, don't be afraid to continue to pursue these projects, that this statute is not as vulnerable, I think, as people are making it out to be. And so just know, if GFOA catches wind of this, or of course, Michigan League and National League of Cities, we're all going to be extremely motivated to let you guys know when and how, if at all, there is some kind of change to the underlying statute. I hope that's helpful.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Also in the Q&A, I think this one's for Chris. Would the Mayo Technical Assistance Center be available to help public school districts? If not, is there any other resource that could provide similar support to schools? It looks like they are eligible on your website, but what does the with support from local government requirement mean?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we do help local school districts. Right now, the Clean School Bus grant is open. We're encouraging ISDs or school districts to apply, and we can help with that. There's kind of a process at the state, but we're going to be able to come in and provide if you're going directly. You know, there's money through the state, but there's also now the federal is opened up. So if you want to go for the federal money for school buses and do more than you could if you're just asking for the state level funds, we can help support the grant application for the federal Clean School Bus Initiative. And the direct pay, what we're doing right now, of course, all the educational information is for everybody. As far as the accounting support, we are working through with the potential accounting entity, what is the volume that we can support? So how many can we help with? And once we figure that out, we'll determine if we have to have a screening process and prioritizing. That's what Cassie was talking about, prioritizing of how, you know, it'll be timing first, probably. those that are trying to get something filed for 2024, but also support for figuring out how to set up a project so that you can claim the credits. That's a long way to say, yes, we do support school districts. It does somewhat depend on the program, how we support them. So definitely get a hold of me at the TAC and ask a question if you have a need. I think, oh, there was another question up there, but just disappeared. So I must have answered it while I rambled on.
You guys are doing awesome answering the questions via text here or typing them out, but I want to bring up a couple of them so we can verbally discuss them too. Emily, you mentioned, I think you nerded out on the answer to this one, but let's say you have a $100,000 solar project that is eligible. How much can an entity expect to receive?
I did nerd out on that one.
Mhm.
So technically there has to be labor rules that are attended to. So the specific labor rules are called PWA. And eventually there will be domestic content provisions, but for right now you're grandfathered in to receive a 30% benefit on a $100,000 project. If you used municipal bonds in whole or in part to finance that project, a 15% haircut will be applied to the portion that municipal bonds are financing. And so let's say it's 100% municipal bond financed. Let me tell you, there is no shame in using municipal bonds to finance it, because even still, a 15% haircut using the tax exemption benefits your entity about 30% of the total cost, so the TIC cost. So all is good. A 15% haircut would be applied then to that $30,000, not to the entire project necessarily. And so there is that provision, and you'll see that in Form 3468, how to calculate that.
Thank you. And do we want to briefly talk about as well, clarifying a solar project put into service in 2023 is past the time to get reimbursement? Yes or no?
Yeah, and that depends on when the solar project was placed into service. That's why that placed into service date is so important. If it was placed into service inside of your fiscal year, and as I understand it, many entities in Michigan are June, June fiscal years, then technically, if you invested in the project, let's say December of 2023, and you want to file for your fiscal year, your first filing deadline was November of this year, but Treasury has granted an automatic six-month extension for you to file your 990T. So technically that project is still covered until May 15th of 2025. I would suggest if you do have such a project, which is a really big project and substantial, that you talk with a tax advisor to make sure that you know your eligibility and timeframes.
Well, I'm going to pause the Q&A for now. We will have additional time at the end of the webinar, so keep asking questions using the Q&A function. Chris, did you want to say something real quick?
I just wanted to put another plug in for that website that is coming and the office hours that are coming through the Technical Assistance Center. And the reason
Sorry, Chris, you're really quiet on my end. Can you guys hear her, or is it me?
Can everyone hear me?
Just crank up your, everyone listening, crank up your volume, and I think it'll be okay.
I just want to plug the Technical Assistance Center website one more time for the office hours that are coming, because in addition to information about direct pay and filing and all that, we're going to have information about grants coming out for clean energy projects. And as you know, if you have a grant, you don't get a direct pay on any granted dollars. But if there is a local match requirement that you use dollars and invest for your local match, that can have, you can claim direct pay on what you're spending out of pocket, if you will. So there are some new grants coming online for clean energy tech, and we're going to be, as they're coming out, we're going to be talking about those also. So please come back often.
Thanks, Chris. With that, I'd like to welcome Simi Barr, and he is going to share the City of Ann Arbor's experience filing for direct pay. Simi, is a senior analyst of municipal operations from the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And Simi, I'm going to give you slide control. You should be able to move them now.
Great. Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me. Like Sarah said, my name's Simi Barr from the City of Ann Arbor. We've heard a lot of great information and great resources around the IRA and direct payments. So I'm just here to talk a little bit about the city's experience in our first direct pay filing, which we just got in last week. So we worked really hard on getting to that point and are sort of now in decompression phase, but also know that we have more to come. So still sort of in a process of working through this stuff, even though we've done it once at this point. So I'm going to start just by sort of where this is all based, which is in environmental action for the city of Ann Arbor. So environmental action in Ann Arbor began at least in the 80s when the city of Ann Arbor passed resolutions to form an energy commission and also adopted an energy plan, which started looking at how energy is used in our buildings and looking to minimize that as much as we can while maintaining our operations. We also formed a green fleets team in the 1980s to look at the environmental impact of the fleet and lessering that over time. More recently, in 2019, City Council declared a climate emergency, and in 2020 adopted A20, which is our ambitious goal for carbon neutrality by 2030. So the strategies in A20, there are 7 of them, but the first 3 are really where the IRA has impacted us this first time around. And that is in powering our grid with 100% clean and renewable energy, electrification of our appliances and vehicles, and then energy efficiency of our buildings and vehicles as well. So a lot of our decarbonization work falls into those, and that's where we began with utilizing direct payments. So we'll start with that first strategy. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll go into solar in just a minute. But yeah, so for a little more context, the city of Ann Arbor has over 160 sites, buildings, and facilities. We have things like our water and wastewater treatment plant, office buildings, Wheeler Service Center, and a lot of parks, with things like ice rinks, pools, community centers. On top of that, we have around 360 vehicles and fuel burning assets in the fleet, about 200 of which are light vehicles and have an annual electricity usage of around 33 million kilowatt hours. So that's what we're working on, reducing and supplying with renewable energy as much as possible. And the IRA has helped out with that. So when it comes to solar, since around January of 2023, we've installed about 700 megawatt, sorry, that's wrong, 700 kilowatts, I wish, installed at city facilities, those 12. We've got 2 more megawatts of upcoming under contract that include solar and storage at our water resource recovery facility, rooftop solar at Ann Arbor City Hall, solar and storage at multiple fire stations as well. So those 700 kilowatts we put in recently involve rooftop, ground mount, and carport arrays. We've got around 11 million total construction cost under contract. Our first direct pay filing was for calendar year 2023, and that's what we were just able to submit last week. So in calendar year 2023, 4 of these arrays went online, about 230 kilowatts. And of that, we have around $160,000 expected return. As far as our fleet electrification goal goes, this was our other significant piece of our filing. We have exceeded 30% electrification of our light fleet. That happened just this past year. So we've got over 50 light-duty battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids in the city fleet. We've got 9 electric heavy vehicles and other assets, and 19 were brought into service in 2023. That's about $1.4 million in equipment purchase and around $160,000 expected through the 45W tax credit. I believe one of these EVs was not eligible due to its manufacturer. So that was one piece I'll touch on later, is sort of the qualified manufacturers piece of this. For EV charging, we put in 29 level 2 EV chargers since January of 2023 at 8 different locations. However, we found throughout our process that none of our EV charging stations were eligible for direct payments due to some of the geographic selection criteria of that credit, as well as some of the funding mechanisms that we use to pay for this charging. So as far as our direct pay team goes, we brought this team together in early 2024, and sort of like Emily said, sustainability has played sort of a central role in the process. So our sustainability team has worked on compiling project lists, interfacing with our Lawyers for Good Governance team that we've been working with. And that's really myself, the municipal operations analyst, and the sustainability director. We've also got finance involved in the process, helping us submit the documentation, submit and review documentation. And that's really our CFO and some of the departmental financial analysts who can help us pull things like purchase orders and that sort of thing. We're part of the Lighthouse cohort with Lawyers for Good Governance and GFOA, which have provided technical advisory services that have been really instrumental to this work. And other teams at the city involved are obviously our legal team, and then our fleet and facilities team, who have a lot to do when we're talking about these electric vehicles that are brought into service. Finally, we worked with Giraffe Financial, who had a agreement with Lawyers for Good Governance for a special offering for this first direct pay filing for sort of an expedited e-filing help. So we went that route, having been a completely new process for us at the city. Having tax experts that we could work with on this first filing was really helpful. The plan was to e-file with Giraffe, but actually there were some issues with the e-filing late last week, and we had to pivot, and our submission ended up being directly filed. So finally, I'll just touch on some lessons learned. One of those was that fiscal year and calendar year decision that was brought up earlier. So we wanted to start with the 2023 calendar year. That's because we submitted, we had projects that went online in the first half of calendar year 2023 that wouldn't have been eligible if we stuck to our actual tax year. So the IRS allowed that flexibility. So we were able to submit for around $320,000 for direct pay for calendar year 2023. We're now in the process of having to file for that stub year, which we needed to file an extension for. So that's part of the lessons learned here, is understanding the timeline, not just the timeline for the fiscal year or tax years you're submitting for, but even understanding what's to come after, because some of those timelines, especially if automatic extensions have been granted and that sort of thing, some of those timelines may interact in a way you weren't anticipating. The There's direct versus e-filing. Like I said, we plan to e-file. The understanding is entities that are e-filing are getting their payments more quickly, but there were issues with the e-filing process. So we ended up having to direct file in the end. There are some great resources out there, specifically from the L4GG and GFOA teams, as Emily mentioned, and referenced to, that were really helpful in understanding the differences in these different submission options. As far as other lessons go, bringing together the stakeholders and the team early in this process is imperative. Good record keeping, having some centralization as to who is leading the process now and in the future, and where those records are going to be kept, understanding those timelines, and then keeping in mind restricted grant funding and the excessive benefits rule. That was something that that we really had to spend some time thinking about, how our funding and how our contracting was going to impact our ability to get direct payments for some of these. And like Emily said earlier on in the process, some of this contracting happened before the final rules around direct pay were even out. So it's about understanding what your contracting mechanisms are going to allow as far as the direct payments, and if you should change things, or change how you're applying grant funding and that sort of thing to ensure you still have eligibility for these direct payments. As far as resources that we found most helpful, those annotated forms from the Lawyers for Good Governance team were incredibly helpful, as well as the IRS forms that Emily mentioned. We were using those early in the pre-registration process, when we were understanding, how to pre-register, and then how to create a clean energy officer, and then delegate various staff in the organization to be able to be clean energy delegates, where we could go in and actually submit projects and submit for that reimbursement. Because as we were working through our pre-registration process, that was at the same time our finance team was, head down in their normal budgeting process. So it's understanding that this is, additional work that they're not accustomed to completing. So that's where sustainability sort of stepped in to try to move us through the process. One of the big challenges, like I said, was understanding that our fiscal year doesn't align with the calendar year or tax year, and how we need to submit for extensions and things like that to be able to compensate for that, and achieve the most significant direct payments as possible. At this point, we've now submitted for the first time. We're also in the process and internal discussions of how we plan to use this direct payment, but it's likely going to be used in some sort of revolving energy fund that can be used to finance further energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and electrification at city sites and within the fleet. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions. I've got my email here, and happy to also be contacted and can chat with you further about our process. But thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Simi. I appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I would like to invite all of our speakers back on for a final round of Q&A. Audience, feel free to ask anything of any of the folks online today or speaking today. And to kick things off, there is a question in the Q&A for Simi. Can you talk about what issues you ran into with the e-filing process that led to direct filing? Anything to take away from that?
So really we were working with the Giraffe Financial on that e-filing, and so we weren't the one, they were having the technical issues that led to the direct filing process needing to take place. So we were in contact with them, heavily throughout the latter portion of last week to ensure, everything was going in on time, and they had all our forms and that sort of thing. But when they went to submit, there were issues, and it seemed that the portal wasn't accepting the submission. So in the end, we just had to send over, sort of an additional authorization for them to direct file on our behalf, which we did, and so they mailed it in for us. They said, what I sort of heard from them was, many of the entities that e-filed were able to successfully, but they started having some issues, I think, towards the end of last week, getting those e-filings, some of those remaining e-filing in. So that's where the issue arose.
I mean, I think with e-filing, Giraffe is an unknown name. Simi, I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me. We didn't know they were even going to be in this market until very recently. But it's only because we've talked with Drake Software, we talked with Intuit, who does TurboTax and TaxSlayer, all of those e-filing platforms. And the challenge is that Intuit didn't quite understand the potential profitability to be made. And so Intuit did not enter the space. They just don't have a product that can accommodate elective pay. So you can't do TurboTax, you can't do TaxSlayer, you can't do all of these different more household names to e-file. And so our advocacy really is going to start to go over into the IRS to say, how can we e-file directly into the IRS so that we don't have to pay e-filing services? Instead, for Simi, it's just easy to go into the IRS and put in that information. We don't have that yet, but we certainly think that once the other companies understand the profitability here, there will be motivation to create software, and there will be competition that will help drive the prices a little bit lower.
Thank you. The next one in the Q&A actually ties in nicely with a question we received with registration. So I want to get into those questions too. But we have a June 30th fiscal year. We purchased 4 EV vehicles in the budget cycle. I was able to create an account, get registration numbers for 4 vehicles. Is the next steps to file form 8936A, 8936, 3800, and that 990T as shown in Emily's table, or is there something more that needs to be done before filing the forms?
Yep, that's basically the next step. You'll have 4 8936A forms that'll roll up into that 8936 and so on. There are some great resources out there, including those annotated tax forms that are really helpful in getting those filled out.
Could you guys also touch on the excess benefit rule?
Yeah, there's documentation out there that can explain it in much more clarity than I can, but the idea is if you have restricted grants going towards any of the projects, you need to ensure that the amount of direct payment you're receiving plus the restricted grant amount for that project doesn't exceed the total project cost. So if you're, for instance, if you had a solar project that was 80% paid for through a restricted grant, you couldn't receive 30% on top of that, because then you exceed 100% of your project cost. And some of that, so it's about understanding whether the funding mechanism is a restricted grant, and and our legal team was really helpful in helping us get to that understanding.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, the legal team is so important because they understand the terms and conditions of the grants that you've accepted. And when you accept it, you sign the letter of intent saying you're gonna follow those, you're gonna follow the law that's underpinning those grants. But the only other thing I would add is that it's really important to have a legal conversation about that, especially as many of you may be thinking about ARPA and at least finishing out your ARPA stuff. So consider those are sticky legal issues that I am not qualified to answer. I just called lawyers crusty, but they are useful. They are the ones who know the answers to that question.
The next question, so if it is unrestricted, we could still receive a benefit. Do you guys understand that one?
Yep, my understanding was unrestricted grants are preferable for this type of thing. I think even if it's restricted, you can receive reimbursements, but you need to be more careful.
Thank you. A couple from registration that we touched on a little bit, but I just want to reiterate. Someone asked, we just purchased 2 e-motorcycles to our police fleet. Would these be qualified?
It depends on a number of things, but one of the things I found early on in the process was, the qualified equipment manufacturers. So the OEM has to work with the IRS to become a qualified manufacturer for the 45W. So that is a big component of it. So I'd start with checking the IRS website.
I just wanted to make one comment because it hasn't come up yet in the questions, and usually it does. And I know this is really important for a lot of communities. Some of you might not be purchasing vehicles, but might be leasing vehicles from different fleets. Some of those are eligible as well. And so I know Lawyers for Good Government, who you've heard us all mention a number of times, has a fact sheet on this. I'm sure, Emily, you have some guidance as well. But just keep that in mind. It does not necessarily have to be purchases. And we at the state are actually working through this and looking at our contracts with, I think it's Wheels Inc. is our third-party operator for a number of fleets. So we'll be investigating that further, but that is still an option and I think important for this audience.
This question was, I understand that direct pay is a reimbursement of monies already spent. How long do you have to wait for that reimbursement?
Well, in the IRS FAQs, they say 45 days, and that's a general guideline for the history of the tax credits. So that's in previous years, tax credits issued to private corporations who are making these types of investments. This has never been done before to payments to local governments. We are at 3 days and counting, 2 calendar days. So Simi might want to put you put a 45-day mark on your calendar to know when that money will be coming in. So we certainly hope it will be shorter than 45 days, but that's the mark that IRS has given us.
All right, it's 11:30. So I think I will turn things over to Lydia to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much to all our great speakers, Emily, Cassie, Chris, and Simi, for helping us better understand direct pay today. And then thank you also to everyone in our audience joining us. We hope you leave this webinar feeling better prepared to tackle direct pay in your own community. And just a few quick notes before we end. We'll send the slide and recording within the next few days. And when you leave this webinar, an exit survey should pop up. So please just take a minute or two to answer those questions. Your responses will be very helpful to us in planning future programming to better assist your community in advancing through the direct pay process. And feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks all.